The following is brought to you by Vertical Vet. Rethink your GPO.
Well, for those of you that are just joining us, my name is Megan Sturgill. I'm the VP of Operations for Vertical Vet, and I am very excited for tonight's webinar. I know some of you guys are in our Platinum Manager program or in our Platinum Owner program, and you all have been able to see this lovely face next to me a couple times within that program. So I'm really excited to be able to have today's webinar all about laying a foundation for your marketing, for your practice, and bringing somebody in that's super special to the Vertical Vet team, super special to our practices, and just knows a whole lot about this information. So I wanted to first make sure that everybody is coming in. It looks like we're all getting everybody in. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce this webinar, how to lay a strong foundation for your practice marketing. Thanks to great friends and partners at BI, we were able to offer this CE free of charge to all of our Vertical Vet members, and as well put it out there into the vet med universe so that everybody can definitely walk away from today's webinar with something new that they can do in their practice. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce those of you who aren't familiar with her and those of you who have seen her face before, Cassandra Parsons with Busy Sites. Busy Sites is a partner with Vertical Vet. So what I want to do, Cassandra, is kind of pass the floor on to you. And if you want to go ahead and get started, let us know a little bit about you and Busy Sites, and we can get started with this webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan, for that great introduction. And hello to those of you who I have met before or had the privilege to work with. And to those of you who don't know who I am and who Busy Sites is, I'll give you like a quick little intro before we jump in. We are a veterinary specific website design and marketing company. So we help practices with digital marketing, online presence as a whole. That is why I'm here to talk to you about your marketing today. I'm really hoping that you walk away from today's conversation with a lot of notes, number one, but hopefully ideas for things to do with your marketing. Now, we didn't call this a boot camp just for fun. I will say we have fit a ton of information into today's discussion, as well as our discussion next month as well. So let me get my screen shared before I forget, because I tend to do that. And I want to make sure y'all can see what we're talking about. So by the end of today's discussion, as well as next month's, you really should have a well-rounded base level understanding of those key elements that make up your online presence. Like I said, I hope you've got some great notes by the end, but also you're going to have a list of questions that will really help you determine if you are investing your marketing budget, your time, your money in the right areas. That's really the goal today. A lot of elements of marketing are very technical. So there's certain things that it would be way too much for me to try and teach you in 1 hour how to do them yourself. So instead, I want to make sure that you have the tools you need and the knowledge you need to ask really effective questions and make sure you are getting the most out of your investment. So I hope you're ready to take notes, and without further ado, let's get started. So there are 6 kind of essential elements that we talk about when we talk about digital marketing. All of these elements together create an ecosystem that they feed back and forth to each other, they support each other, and really are more successful when they're all working together. Number one that you probably all know is the most obvious one is our website. The website is like your ground level that we're seeing here. There's a reason we called today's conversation laying a foundation for your marketing. Your website is the foundation of all the other elements that you need to build on top of it. You could have an amazing social media presence, an awesome Google Ads manager who's a Google partner and they know what they're doing. But any type of marketing that is sending a lot of traffic to your website is completely useless if your website doesn't work. Now, when I say doesn't work, though, I don't mean a website that's down or broken. I don't think you need a marketing webinar to tell you that a broken website doesn't help you. What I mean is a website that is actually turning your visitors into paying clients, right? Getting pet parents to choose you as their care provider for their pet. Our next element is SEO and search engine optimization. So we're going to stick with the foundation analogy because I think it works really well. If your website's your foundation, the SEO is kind of like the walls and the roof. It's the thing that makes you able to say, hey, that's a house, or hey, that's a website, right? It's the thing that makes your website visible to users that are doing searches online. Third, we have something called PPC. It goes by many names. You've probably heard of Google Ads. This is like the door. It's the easiest way to get people into your website. Fourth, we have social media. So this is like your windows. These are the things, the posts that give people a little bit of a window into your practice. They see your team interacting with their patients. They see your team doing activities together. And it gives them a little peek into that personality and gets them to feel like, hey, I want to go in there. I want to see them. I want to be part of that community. Fifth, we have something else that goes by many names. Primarily, it's directory listings. This is your Google My Business, your Yelp, those areas that have your name, address, phone number, which is where NAP comes from, and contact information. This can be thought of as the address because quite literally in many cases it's your address. It's the thing, that helps people figure out how to get to you, not just online, but offline and physically get to your location as well. And last but not least, we have reputation management or reviews. This is the thing that makes you attractive, right? So all the pretty things outside of the house that make you, wow, I want to go over there, right? It's the path there. Your reviews are the things that make pet parents want to interact with you more. They trust you through reading those reviews and they feel like this is a good place to go and I believe they're going to take care of me. Now, these are a lot of elements. There's a lot of details in all of these things. So today, for today's discussion, we're only going to talk about the first three: website, SEO, and paid ads. Numbers 4 through 6 will be covered in our next conversation next month, which you can learn about from the fabulous Vertical Vet team that's here. So for now, 1 through 3, we're going to jump right into talking about the website. So we're going to start off with a question. Rhetorical, but how long do you think you have before a website visitor forms an opinion about your business? Give you a second to think about it. I think most often we hear, oh, a few seconds, right? We all know attention spans are short. Well, 0.05 seconds. It takes less than a second for users to form an opinion about your website that determines whether or not they like the website, whether or not they'll stay or leave. Really an overall opinion of you as a provider. This really demonstrates how important it is to have that good first impression, right? And with a modern website that is meeting those current standards for design and functionality, you can entice that pet parent to stay, learn more about you, and most importantly, choose you as their provider. So we've got 0.05 seconds. How do we make sure you're following those standards for website design? Well, if you do some Google searching, there is a baseline hierarchy of needs that your website has, kind of similar to the hierarchy of needs we talk about in psychology as humans, right? So it's basically the foundational things that you need for your website to function. To figure out if your website is meeting those needs, there's some basic questions you can ask. Is it functional? Is it reliable? Is it understood? Does it attract users? And then to help you answer these questions, there's 5 main categories of website design and structure that we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about how you can do it yourself, but then also, again, questions that you need to ask to make sure that your website's fulfilling these things. Those 5 areas are performance, design, content, navigation, and functionality. Now, each of these categories addresses different elements of your website that are influencing how people interact with your business online and really determine the success or failure of your website. So simply put, the better you make your user experience on the website, the more successful your marketing will be. So as we go through these things, I really want you to ask yourself honestly, how you feel like your website is ranking in these categories, if it's fulfilling them, or if there's areas that you need to get with your provider to improve. If you want to follow along live, you can certainly do so. We have a website grader online that takes you through the same exact elements that we're going to talk about right now, and you can check them off as we go to see if your website is fulfilling those needs. So let's jump right into number one, performance. Performance is commonly kind of three main categories: speed, security, and responsive design. So first we'll talk about speed, that dreaded loading icon, which, if I'm being honest, every time I get to this slide in the presentation, I worry that something's not loading, and it increases stress, right? Because it's how we think as users. We don't want to have to wait for something to load. So what is speed? This is your website loading quickly, not just on desktop, but also mobile devices. And this is so important because nearly half of users now, I believe it's about 47%, expect a load time of no more than 2 seconds when they land on a website. So how do you make sure that your website is loading quickly? Well, there's a few details, and this is really might require some flexibility and conversation between you and your website provider, because there might be something that you really want to have on the website, and your website provider might have to say, hey, we can do it, but it's going to slow down the loading time. These are things like your image size. This is the main area where you might be involved. So you'll give your website provider the highest quality images you have, hopefully. We'll talk about that more later. But then they're going to optimize them in a way that makes sure the person viewing the website's internet connection can load them up quickly. There's also things in, frankly, just the overall code structure of the website and the server type that your website is hosted on that will affect how quickly it loads. These are all things to consider if you are one of those that's managing your own website. Those are things to ask when you're shopping around for a hosting provider or a platform that you're going to build your website on. My favorite joke with this, why it's so important, is with this image the loading icon that you're seeing here. The saying goes, if you stare at the image long enough, it turns into a back button. That's not what we want, right? We don't want people leaving your website because it took so long to load that they just gave up, because you know what that means? They're going on to the next person, right? Now, something I want you to keep in mind, especially with speed, is there's this X factor of internet connection. So we all have different connections, some faster, some slower. There's different people streaming different things, right? So your website could be performing at a really high level and someone still might have a slow connection that just causes it to load. The thing I usually tell people, so you don't stress too much about that, is if I have a slow internet connection, I know that as a user. I know that everywhere I try to go online takes forever and it's my own problem. And you're not necessarily going to take the hit for that. You just want to make sure that everything in your power is done to make sure it's loading quickly. On to our next element of performance, security. This is answered by a basic question. Is your website a secure place for users to submit their information? How do you know if it's secure? The first thing is if your website has something called an SSL certificate. It's also referred to as a security certificate. This is the thing that makes your website say HTTPS instead of HTTP. These have gained a lot of ground in the past few years with search engines, and they are a way your website can quickly demonstrate credibility to search engines, that you are a trusted website to go to. About 5 years ago, Google announced that Chrome would start marking websites that were only HTTP as not secure. And then since then, in the last 5 years, now if your website isn't secure, there may even be a red warning that says not secure right next to your URL bar and hazard icon. This is a great way to scare users away from your website, even if it is secure, and you don't want that, right? We want this green padlock icon. Green means go, right? That's what you want to see, just like this image that we're looking at. Now, because of the importance of having a secure website and having this SSL certificate, it also is at a point where it can have a direct impact on your SEO, because this is one of the factors that search engines take into account when they're determining search ranking. Now, these security certificates most website providers that I know in the space offer them now. There's different ways that they might offer them, but they do. And then if you have your own website, again, that you manage, you usually can add it on as a service. So if you have a Squarespace website or things like that, you can usually do a little upgrade for the SSL certificate. If you've been ignoring it, let this be your sign to not ignore it anymore. Make sure you get that SSL on your website. Now, these are an important part of credibility and search rankings, but website security is more than just that SSL certificate. So another question to consider is how you or your website providers are creating and storing passwords to your website. So making sure that your passwords are strong. I know it's hard to remember the strong passwords, but they're there for a reason. And make sure that they're stored in a secure place that's not shared with anyone else. Why does this matter? This is one of the main number one things that keeps your website from being hacked. And even though you might not be storing payment information or human medical records on your website, you still likely are collecting sensitive information, things like your client's contact information, maybe even their address if you're taking new client forms, things like that. So making sure that your website is secure in these two ways is going to really make sure that that information is safe. Our next element of performance is responsive design. This used to often be called mobile-friendly design as well. That's probably a term many of you have heard. But calling it responsive design is because we want to make sure your website is easy to view and interact with on all devices, not just a cell phone, right? So you have everything nowadays from a tiny old iPhone screen up to the giant widescreen curved monitors that are not far from just being a TV, right? And everything in between. And with over half now of internet traffic being mobile, and that's cell phones, tablets, things like that, and even more so, 8 in 10 consumers saying that they will stop engaging with content that doesn't display well on their device. This is just making that responsive design more and more important. Now, it's important to think about responsive design not just at the beginning when your website is first built. I think that's a standard nowadays. But you also need to think about it with all these changes that are happening on your website, right? Websites are not a static thing. They're constantly updating. So anytime those changes are made, make sure you're not taking it for granted and you're double checking that things look good on that smaller device too. What does responsiveness mean though? This is a word we hear a lot, right? But how do you actually define a website that is responsive? Well, primarily, it's easy to interact with and easy to navigate. So this is things like clicking buttons. If I'm on a cell phone and I try to click one button, do I accidentally click 3? Or scrolling up and down the screen on any device, opening and closing items. Also thinking about someone who's navigating your website on a desktop where they have a mouse and they can see things that change on hover versus on a phone where all they have is touching, right? Those are the kinds of interactions you want to think about and make sure that it's working well. A more basic question to ask yourself, if you have someone else managing your website for you, is, are you getting frustrated navigating your website on a cell phone? Because if you're frustrated navigating your website on a cell phone, you can guarantee your users are, and that's where you have a problem. This ease of interaction allows them to want to continue browsing around your website, right? Which is what we want in order to get them to become an actual client. All right, done with performance and on to design. This is kind of the pretty stuff, right? But remember, 0.05 seconds before our users form an opinion. So how do you create a lasting impression through the design of your website? Because this is all visual, right? There's 3 main elements we're going to review right now. Imagery, which includes your photos and videos. branding, which is not just your business branding with your logo, but also local branding, and then typography. So first, let's talk about imagery. Like I said, this includes both photos and videos. The number one question to ask yourself is, are the photos and videos up to date and high quality? If it's a blurry, grainy, too dark, too small, any of those things type of image, it's not going to make a lasting impression other than, oh, that doesn't look very good, right? And that's not the impression we want people to have when they get to your website. Next question is, does your website only use stock photos that feel canned? Now, this is an important differentiation because we're not worried about a website using stock photos at all. That's almost a necessity sometimes. But the question is, do those stock photos that are used really reflect your area? Do they reflect the feel of the practice? So if you really want to convey being a fun, silly practice, have photos selected by your designer that reflect that feeling versus the very canned photos. You all know the ones I'm talking about: white background, super stiff, cold feeling, right? Or even the same one used a bunch of times. That's not doing anything to add an impression to your website. So if you need to use stock photos, that's fine. There are millions of great options out there that can be used. You just want to make sure they're ones that really feel like a good fit for your practice. And this is where we get to our third question. Good fit for the practice. Does the imagery on your website provide a glimpse into the personality of the practice? So like I said, if you're that fun, silly practice, are you showing those fun, silly pictures? This example that we're looking at is one of my favorites. So they have this big, oversized, painted all kinds of colors, wooden chair right in their lobby. And it is like the photo booth for all the pets. So they have this whole album of photos that they sent us that we were able to tie in on the website. And this gives a great amount of recognition between visiting your website online and in person, because now I, as a pet parent, walk in and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the chair. I have to take a picture of my dog in the chair, right? And I've seen all these other adorable dogs. My dog's like my fur kid. This is going to be the new background on my phone if it's me. So if you have things like that in your practice, if you have the practice cat, things like that, use it on your website. Those are the fun things that really make you memorable. Our next element of design is branding. Now, we're specifically talking about business and local branding. And I think branding is the thing that gets overlooked a lot because people think it's just the pretty part, right? But what we need to know, and those of you who came to our branding webinar earlier this year have already heard this fact, that consistent branding increases your revenue by 23%. That is even more than going from an $800,000 a year to a $1 million a year practice. This is the kind of impact that branding, good branding on your website, on your other channels can have. We're not going to go into a ton of detail on this today. That's why we had a whole other conversation about it. But there's a couple of key questions you can ask to figure out if your branding is effective. First, for your business's branding, you want to check if the website's design, color palette, typography, even the photography ties in with the logo. Does it feel cohesive as you're going through the website? Then, from a local standpoint, does your website design, language, photography reflect the community you live in? So you don't want people to feel like you are a large corporation coming from the other side of the country in a big city when you're in the Midwest, right? They're not going to feel like you're part of the community. You can really convey this local branding through visual cues like photos, depending where you are. Even language that is familiar can be used. My favorite example is Don't Be the Practice in Topeka, Kansas, where it's flat as far as you can see, that has a picture of a giant snow-capped mountain on the background of their website. I've seen it before, happens more often than I wish it did, but those are the key things you want to think about. The example we saw here is in a coastal town. You can see they have coastal colors used on the website, consistent feel through the pictures on the site. All these things really lead to a cohesive look that is really pleasant for a user to interact with. Makes them, again, want to stay there longer. Our last element of design is typography. So there's kind of a few things to think about with this, and I think it's something that people don't often consider, but it's actually relatively easy to implement, even in your other marketing, whether it's online or offline. The first thing to ask yourself is, how many font types am I using? If you're using a website provider to manage your website and you want to, you can find out from them what the font types are on your website and use them in other places as well. Most of them are available to download, and I'm sure many of your providers would be happy to give you those names. But if you're managing your website yourself, look through the website and think about how many font types are used. We really don't want more than 2 or 3. You might have kind of your standard paragraph font that's your basic, easy to read, and then your accent right here that matches the logo. Once you have those font types figured out, you want to make sure the way that they're applied to the page is very legible. Typography plays a massive role in the legibility, the usability, just the accessibility. All these things of your website come from if the font size is easy to read, so not super tiny. You don't want people feeling like they have to zoom in. If the colors are easy to read, so please don't put a bright red text on top of a bright yellow background that's going to make people feel like they need to squint. Think about how you're applying those colors, and make sure it's a way that's, visually easy to follow. And then, are the colors consistent? This goes back to that cohesiveness, right? We want to keep a very cohesive feel throughout the site, and that's done through the colors, not just of things like our, buttons and banners, but the text itself. All right, on to content. This one's a pretty straightforward one. There's 3 main aspects of content that we have to consider: originality, quality, and layout. So originality is basically make sure that the content on your website is unique and specific to your practice. There's a few reasons for this. Number 1, copyright infringement, right? I think most of us learned about that in grade school. You want to make sure you're not copying word for word what the guy down the street had created for his practice. Number 2, this actually has an effect on your SEO. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but really Google knows what copyright is too, right? These search engines know, and this is something that really can affect your credibility in the eyes of search engines if you're copying content from someone down the street or even in another county or state. And then the third reason is really just your credibility to the user. You are different than the practice down the street, right? So make sure you're reflecting that through your content. Second is quality. The quality of your content and making sure that it's free of typos, grammatical errors, things like that, really shows a level of care and professionalism, and just that you're invested in that information and how it's being conveyed to pet parents. And then third, layout. Is your content laid out in a way that is easy to comprehend? What is easy to comprehend with a content layout? Well, instead of a wall of text with paragraphs, think in bullets. Think in short paragraphs, short sentences, and you want to lay it out really in a visually pleasing way that allows your users to find the information they're looking for by skimming the page instead of having to read through a very large block of text. Our attention spans, unfortunately, are not so long anymore to make it through the whole page, right? We can show the importance of this layout with one very simple comparison. Let's say we're talking about frequently asked questions. Would you rather interact with this kind of just straight text down the page, or this? Layout is more inviting. Well, I can tell you that all of our analytics show it's definitely this one. Why is that? Well, before I hit this section, all these 5 little sections or these little toggles are collapsed. I can find exactly the question I want the answer to, open it, get my answer, and move on to the next thing, right? It allows me to find the information that applies to myself, my needs, my pet's needs faster instead of reading through information that doesn't apply to me. Now, content layout goes hand in hand with navigation, which is the next section we're going to talk about. This is your quick access tools in the menu, but two less commonly considered aspects of navigation are the accessibility of your website and privacy compliance on your website. So first we'll start with the easy one, these quick access tools. What are we talking about? First, contact information. So your phone number, directions, email address, contact form, those kinds of things, are they very easy to locate immediately upon hitting your website? Next, click to action tools. So that phone number, if I'm on a mobile device, can I click the phone number and immediately initiate a phone call to your practice? And the address, that's also easy to find, can I click that to open up directions? Those things, again, we're going back to that easy and fast to get the information that I need. And last but not least, those client tools that you are investing in month after month, make sure those, your online store, your pet portal, maybe you have live booking, make sure those are super easy to find, especially because your existing pet parents that are going to your website, that's usually why they're going there, right? They're headed there to get straight to that tool that they know they need to use to interact with you as a business. So this example we have here is one of my favorites because it displays a couple of things. Number one, when you're thinking about this, remember that your pet parents are interacting online with many other industries, other businesses outside of yours. So there's certain things they're used to seeing, and we can take advantage of that on our own websites, right? So this example, you see across the top, she has a series of icons. Everybody knows, for the most part, if it's an envelope, that's my way to contact you. If it's a calendar, that's my way to get on your calendar. If it's a maps marker, that's how I'm going to find you, and so on, right? So she's made all these things within one tap as soon as the page loads for that user. This is a really great way to improve that user experience and make sure that the pet parents that are on your website are not getting frustrated digging around trying to find what they need. Okay, the kind of complicated ones from the navigation standpoint. The first one is accessibility. You have probably been hearing more and more about this lately, especially if you're in states like California, where it's coming up more and more. I know Florida is another one, but really this is something that's happening nationwide. What this is basically similar to how we have accessibility guidelines and ADA compliance in the physical world of interacting with businesses. That's now being applied online, right? So there's website guidelines for accessibility now that make your website easy to interact with for people that are maybe visually impaired or hearing impaired, things like this. So what you want to make sure is, number one, is there an option to view your website in an accessible format for ADA compliance? There's all kinds of ways to do this. Every provider has their own ways. And if you're managing your website yourself, check with the platform that you built it on to see if they offer some kind of easy upgrade for accessibility, because this is becoming more and more important as time goes on. You also want to think about the navigation and how your website is understood for people that, again, maybe they're using a screen reader because they're visually impaired, so they have a device that's reading the screen to them. There's all kinds of tools. The example that you're seeing on the screen here is a little widget that allows users to change the contrast, increase the text size, change the text style, change the line height so they can focus on one section at a time. There's all kinds of tools out there that will allow you to make your website really usable for those who need it. And also, from a business standpoint, protect yourself from the risk of lawsuits that are now coming about as a result of these compliance standards. So really, I cannot express enough how important it is to look into this. But again, I want to kind of reiterate, I'm not saying this for you to go back to your website provider and yell at them and be like, why isn't my website accessible? Because this is a relatively new thing. I know most of the providers I'm familiar with are moving this direction if they haven't already, and they're all kind of in the process of meeting these new guidelines that were set out. And the guidelines are also changing pretty often right now because we're figuring out this landscape of website accessibility, right? So this is an opportunity to really collaborate with your provider if they're willing to work with you on it, and hopefully get your website to a point where you are in that accessibility compliance.
Sandra, I'm
yeah.
so sorry. I just want to, someone asked a question that's relevant to what you're talking about right now.
Yeah.
This question came from Kathy, and she said, does the website developer charge for updating to these ADA compliances? And is it a one-time fee?
That is a great question. I can't answer for other providers. I can tell you what I hope. I hope that they're not charging you for it. I can tell you at Busy Sites, we don't. We have, this is kind of a good example. I'll tell you what we do. I know at least a few other providers are doing this. We have a standard kind of, there's a certain set of guidelines because they were implemented in phases that are in effect. And we made sure, okay, we're gonna get all of our sites to that standard right away while we're kind of working to the next level of the guidelines that was released. If a client emails me right now and they're concerned about it, I'm kind of saying, okay, let's do an audit basically to make sure, because we know that we already went through the work about a year ago of getting the sites accessible, but let's do an audit just to be extra sure. And that's just what we're doing because as your website professional, that is my responsibility, right? Is to make sure that I'm keeping up with website standards. That's what you pay us to do. It's what you're paying your website provider to do. So I can tell you, I hope that they wouldn't charge. If they do, I would imagine it would be a one-time fee because the bulk of the guidelines have been released now. I haven't heard of another set coming out. And that would be the only reason I would see like a multiple fee is if another set of guidelines came out and they had to kind of change things all over again. So hopefully they're not charging. If they are, it should be a one-time fee. And if they are charging, it is worth it. So please go ahead and do it. Hopefully that answers the question, Kathy. Great question though. All right, on to our last element of navigation, which is privacy compliance. This is another new one. Depending how much time you spend online, you have probably noticed more and more websites have a little banner across the top, like what you see in our screenshot here, that basically says, we use cookies on our website to give you a better experience, blah, 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 right? And you can accept it or you can change your settings. There's all kinds of different ways providers are doing this. Why is this happening? Well, you may have heard a few years back of something called GDPR that happened in Europe. That similar concept is starting to take effect here. It's happening state by state, so you may not be in a state where this is the case yet, but these privacy laws are coming into effect that essentially make sure that you're giving your users control over their personal information online. The great thing about this is because it's something that is only becoming more widespread and we can expect will probably be the case in all across the country before too many years go by, there's a lot of tools that allow you to implement this. If you are listening and you're in the state of California, they are one of the, I think the first state that has fully passed a standard like this. So if you are in California, make sure you have some kind of banner like this on your website, talk to your provider and see if they can implement this. Or if you are, again, managing your website yourself, reach out to the support company or check the forums of whatever platform your website's built on. Make sure you can get something like this added. I forgot to click, but there's a little note about California is a good example of where it's already in place. Thankfully on this one too, I should add, there's not a lot of heavy lifting you have to do. You don't even really need to understand what cookies are to have this in effect because there's, like I said, different tools. A lot of the platforms where you're managing your site yourself, again, probably have this as an add-on that you can include on the website. All right, on to functionality. So these are our analytics and tools that really improve user experience. So you've done all of these great things on your website, right? You've made it up to this point, but how do you know where they're working or where you should invest more money? Well, this is where analytics come in. These are like the diagnostics for your website. There's two main kinds of analytics. Google Analytics is like the gold standard. This is what tells you what channels most of your traffic is coming from. So are people finding you from social media, from your paid ads, from your SEO? And then that's how you can determine where you might want to invest more money or where you might need to stop spending money because it's not really working. It really allows you to be more intentional with your marketing budget. And then the visual analytics helps you figure out how people are interacting with your website when they arrive. So this is where you can make those educated decisions on changes to your website design. If you have tools you want to make sure people are interacting with more, you might need to move them to a more visible place, things like that. I kind of liken this to treating a patient in your practice. You're not going to create a treatment plan without first knowing what the problem is, right? How do you figure out the problem? You do diagnostic tests. Analytics are that diagnostic test for your website. They allow you to figure out what's going on, figure out what's happening kind of in the inner workings, and then make an educated plan based on that data for your website performance. Now, some bonuses of functionality. If you are listening to our webinar today and you're thinking, I got all those things, my website is awesome, that is perfect. So now it's time for you to level up. Now I want you to think about how your website can be used for your existing client base to make their experience better and help with client retention. We're not going to get into these things today. There's also actually a whole separate webinar about this one that we did a while back. But some things to consider are your online forms, online bill pay, FAQs, live chat or texting, careers pages where people can apply, all these things that really add that extra layer of functionality to your website where it's going to do even more work for you. All right, we made it through the website. You've got your strong foundation. It's ready to turn pet parents into clients for you. So now, how do you get them there? This is where SEO comes in. I like to refer to SEO as like the old reliable of digital marketing. It was really the first way online of getting people to your website who didn't already know you. It takes a well thought out strategy, but once the ball's rolling, it really can lead to long lasting results. So what is it? Well, the Oxford Online Dictionary says all this whole long thing that I'm not going to read you because it's really confusing and a lot of it probably won't mean very much. So let's talk about what it's actually doing for you. SEO are techniques that help you establish credibility with search engines. This credibility is what helps your website show up at the top when someone searches veterinarian. Another way I kind of like to think about it with how the search engines work is that online search is playing matchmaker between the pet parent and the vet practice. And you need to convince the search engine that you are the best option for this pet parent. I'm here, pick me. I'm the best one. I'm the one they want. SEO is how you accomplish that. So what does SEO involve? Well, I'm not kidding when I say it's a whole series of techniques. It is all-encompassing. It involves your website every time. And in more advanced SEO strategies, it also might take into account your social media, your reviews, things like that. But today we're going to focus on just SEO that happens on your website. Please don't try to write all these down if you're taking notes. It's things like understanding the goals of your practice, keyword research, website structure, SEO-friendly content, content structure, link structure, tagging, labeling, all the behind-the-scenes stuff, and so much more. So with all those things, how do you determine an SEO strategy? This is a trick question. You don't. Unless you're a search engine optimizer yourself, I really don't want you spinning your wheels trying to create your own SEO strategy. Even if you manage your own website, you should be able to find some kind of SEO consultant that will let you keep managing the website with this very technical task. As you saw from the list on the previous slide, there's a lot of moving parts. And really, to be effective at it just comes from experience. So instead, what I want to talk to you about today is some pointed questions you can ask either your current provider or a prospective provider if you're looking to bring someone in to help with your SEO to really evaluate your return on investment. The first one is, how do you determine what keywords to optimize my website for? There are some companies, especially if they're verticalized companies and they're specializing in one industry, that they might try to templatize this process and use the same set of keywords for every business that signs up with them. That is not sufficient. I want you to make sure that your SEO provider is doing research to determine the keywords that are searched the most in your area that will bring the right audience to your business. Now, I'm going to be totally transparent here. There are the top 3 that in almost every city I search, it's veterinarian, vet, and animal hospital. But the reason this keyword research is important is because that's not always the case. Most often the case doesn't mean always the case, and you might be the area where there's a different keyword that's still applicable that is searched more and is going to bring more traffic to your website. I'll give you an example. If you only see small companion animals, you don't want your website optimized for exotic veterinarian, because if someone is searching for exotic veterinarian and your website comes up, you can't help them, right? Now, on the flip side, if you only see horses, a search term like veterinarian is too broad. So instead, you might need to focus a little bit more and optimize for words like equine veterinarian. This is what brings us to our next question. How do your goals as a business play a role in the SEO strategy on your website? Maybe you sell a ton of puppy and kitten packages, but your practice has really great surgery services and you want to sell more of those, right? This is the area where SEO can help if you're working with your provider and they're asking these kinds of questions. So goals for selling more specific services will help determine what keywords to optimize for. Puppy vaccinations might be searched more, but maybe you're just overwhelmed with new puppy appointments and you're like, I really wish that we were selling more surgery. And if that keyword is searched a fair amount too, I'm going to strategize accordingly and optimize your website for that keyword to help you sell more of that service and meet your goals as a business. Third question, how can you show me if the SEO on my website is effective? This is the most important question for you to determine your return on investment. So let's look a little deeper at how this question is answered. Your SEO could be working in the sense that you're showing up on the first page of Google. But what makes it effective is users actually visiting your website as a result of seeing your listing in those search results. And there are 2 main ways that we can tell this. First, you need to know if your website is actually ranking. The trick with this, though, is there's all kinds of ways that providers can make you believe your website is ranking, or on the flip side, believe that your website's not ranking, because Google wants to make me happy as a user, right? So if I have a client who's a veterinarian in San Antonio, I'm probably visiting their website a lot because I'm managing it, right? If I go to my regular Chrome browser and I search veterinarian in San Antonio, Google knows I like that website. It's going to show me that website first. This is where those cookie-free search tools come in. It allows me to search, it allows you to search, they're free tools, as though you are just a random pet parent in your area who has never seen this website before. So it will help make sure you're seeing honest results of how your website is ranking in your area. Next, we want to know if they're passing you by in search results or actually, visiting your website. This is where the analytics come in, just like we talked about before. You have Google Analytics, like we said, that'll tell me how many visitors are coming to my website from an online search and how long they spent there. And then the visual analytics, like we talked about, which will show me, okay, users who are coming to my website from an organic search, what did they do? What were they looking for? These are those questions that will help you get a better understanding of if your SEO strategy is working and if you're getting an acceptable return on investment. So now we've got the SEO in place. We're on the last thing. I know we've covered a lot of technical stuff, but we're almost through. Your paid advertising. like we said, this is the fast track way to get people in the door. It's a fast track to visibility. SEO is like the old reliable, right? Paid ads is like the I want it now because it allows you to pay for placement at the top of search results. This is why people tend to see a pretty high return on investment when they do decide to add paid advertising. It depends on the area. Now, I want to make sure we all know what I'm talking about, and paid ads goes by many, many names. There's pay-per-click advertising, search engine marketing, paid advertising, PPC, Google Ads. But Google owns about 92% of search market today. So for today's discussion, we're just going to keep it simple. We call it Google Ads. So how does Google Ads work? First, you have to do something similar with SEO. You want to determine what keywords you need to target through that research. So again, make sure that when someone does a search for 24-hour veterinarian and you offer 24-hour emergency care, you are coming up for that search, right? Then we set the radius. So this is where Google Ads get fun because you can get really specific. So you choose a geographic area, mile radius from your practice, or a set of zip codes where your ads will be displayed. Then you get to select your target audience. So this is when you hear people talk about, oh my gosh, there's so much information about me online. This is kind of where that becomes useful and you can use it to your advantage. So you can optimize your campaign for a specific demographic based on the device they're on, their search intent, their other interests online, all those kinds of things that will help you match up with the right person for your business. And then you bid for placement. So you set an ad budget. You say, here's how much I'm willing to spend this month. And you bid for that placement at the top of the search engines to make sure you're seen before your competition. This is the coolest part about Google Ads because you pay for what you use and not a penny more. You've probably heard, if you've shopped for Google Ad services at all, terms like pay-per-click or cost per click. Those are very literal terms when it comes to Google Ads. You pay when someone clicks on your ad, and based on your budget and your bid, you end up with that cost per click each time someone clicks to visit your website. And this is why the return for Google Ads is great, because you only pay when someone wants to learn more about your business. So aside from that, why might you consider Google Ads? Let's start by looking at the anatomy of a Google search result page, because you've all seen these many times, right? But I want to make sure you know which section we're talking about here. No, you can't read the words. That's okay. We're just going to kind of we're going to block it out. So these first three results here, those are our Google Ads. Below that, you've got your Google My Business or Maps results. And then we get to our organic search results, which happen from SEO. Now, not every search has Google Ads show up at the top, but when they do, you can see they're at the very top, which is the number one reason to think about Google Ads. It's top placement on Google before they see anything else. Next, a lot of practices see a good return like we talked about because you're only paying for what you use. And when you are paying, it's because that person says, oh, this business sounds like what I'm looking for. Let me learn more about them. Next, that detailed targeting means you're attracting the right demographic for your website and therefore makes them more likely to convert into a pet parent that's actually a client, right? So if you're working with your Google Ads manager to target the right kind of group for, or right search or right interest for your practice, you're really increasing your chances of getting that great return. Last but not least, you can constantly refine Google Ads. So your ads will get better and better with time with the right Google Ads manager. As that performance of your ads is tracked and the keywords and targeting and the bidding is all refined, you'll just see your ads become more and more effective. Now, all of that said, these 4 benefits are really only benefits if you're set up for success ahead of time. So here's some questions I want you to consider. These are things to think about before you decide if you want to try Google Ads, while you're shopping for a provider, and then once you have a campaign that's running. So first, Can your website convert them into a client? There's a reason we started with the website conversation. So you want to remember, you're paying when someone decides to learn more about you. This means they're visiting your website with the intent of deciding whether or not they want to do business with you. So you have to make sure your website can convert that shopping pet parent into a client. This is why Google Ads is the last thing we're talking about today. Website's got to come first. Once you've decided you want to try it, there's things you can look for in a provider. First, look if they're a Google partner. This is kind of like an extra certification if you think about like continuing education as a veterinarian or a technician. To be a Google partner, you have to show a certain amount of experience and expertise in running ads. You have to be managing a specific dollar amount of ads per month, and you have to go through extra education by Google to understand how best to use their product. There's also some questions you can ask that will help you make sure you're comparing apples to apples when you look at different providers. Number one, how often are you optimizing campaigns? Remember, the more we refine our ads, the better they work for us. Will you eliminate low performing ads? Keep your money on something that's not bringing pet parents into your doors. How many ads do you create for a campaign? So different ads will work for different audiences. You'll want to have a couple running at least at a time. And then what kind of support do you include for ad revisions? Because your business will change, your goals will change, your services will change, you'll add new services, you'll bring on a specialist, or you'll bring on someone who can treat another species. You want to make sure those things are reflected in your ad campaigns as well, so that you're still bringing in the right audience. Then, once your campaign is running, make sure you're receiving regular reports on your performance. Again, this is how you keep tabs on how your budget's used and what's working best. So, all these tools we talked about today, how do they set you up for marketing success? I want to help you kind of think about how they all work together. And then if you join us in our webinar next month, you'll see kind of how the whole picture comes together. If you have a successful SEO strategy or a paid ads campaign, this is going to make it easier for users to find you when they're looking for you after seeing you somewhere else. So they see something on social media and they're thinking, oh man, that post, there was that vet down the street. It was ABC Pet Hospital, I think, but you're ABC Pet Clinic. If they're in your area and they search ABC Pet Veterinarian or even ABC Pet Hospital, chances are you're going to show up if you have a good ad campaign, right? Same thing if you have strong SEO, you're going to show up at the top. It's going to be easier for them to find you. And then when they do find you, whether they're looking for you or you're one of the results in a regular search when they're trying to find a veterinarian, that higher performing website is going to lead to that higher conversion rate when users get there. So you have all these people funneling, or all these strategies funneling people to your website. How do you turn them into an actual client? That's where those website best practices come in. Now, once those things are in place, that's when we get into building the rest of the house. Once those current standards are there, you can diversify with, like what we talked about at the beginning, directory listings to help people find you easier, social media, reputation management. All those things then start just working together to feed more traffic to the website and really create a cohesive unit that's working for you all the time. That is what we will cover next month, because I think I probably already covered more than enough today. I hope I didn't overwhelm anyone. So I'm happy to answer questions now if there are any, Casey or Megan, and otherwise you also know where to find me on LinkedIn or email if you do have any other questions.
Oh, Cassandra, this was great. I did have a couple questions that came through both online and through social, and a couple other, well, let's just be real, through my cell phone. So a couple of the questions is, how do I know when I'm using a high-res image? So I'm guessing that you're taking a picture, you want to use a picture of a client's pet or maybe a team picture in your website. How do you know you're taking it in high res to be able to use it on your website?
I love this question. It's a great question. I will tell you the quickest answer, which is what I always tell my clients. when you send an image to your website provider or to your email because you're trying to get it from your phone to your website, and your phone pops up with the options to choose different sizes, always choose actual size. That's what's going to send that full size image to whoever's adding it to the website, to make sure that then they can do what they need to do with sizing it. Now, if you're just looking to check the existing images on your website, really the best way to tell is if it's blurry or grainy. If you notice it's blurry or grainy, either try to resend the original version or take a new version of the picture.
That makes sense. Awesome. Okay. The next question that I had come in, I got a good giggle from this one. Can Google Ads get my online pharmacy above Chewy? Please help.
Oh boy. Okay. That's a layered question. Your online pharmacy, if you're talking about online pharmacy like VetSource, Vet's First Choice, any of the numerous ones that are out there, because that's a separate website, you can't necessarily run ads that are going directly to your online store. You could run ads that go to a landing page on your website that talks about your online store and then guides the pet parent there. But the unfortunate part that, please don't shoot the messenger, is that Chewy has a massive ad budget compared to all of us, mom and pop vet practices. And I wouldn't want to see you try and compete with that, because I feel like the return won't be as good. What I would suggest instead is make your online store really easy to find on your website, right at the top, super easy. So that's where your pet parents default, because why do pet parents choose Chewy? It's easy, right? It's the path of least resistance. So you need to make your option just as easy to get them to default to your online store. I would love to talk more about that. If whoever asked that question wants to reach out, I'm happy to help you brainstorm.
I love it. I know. When I saw that, I was like, go get them, girl. Like, I feel you on this one. Yeah. The struggle is real.
Yeah.
The last question that I had come in was kind of, I guess, going off of consistency. When you're looking at your website, I guess this question was kind of hard to read. Is your website supposed to be a portal into your practice? Or I guess the question is going off of, how do you tie in your website with your social, with your online pharmacy, with what your practice looks like when they walk in the door, with the forms that you send home? I mean, obviously consistency is important, and I know that's a big topic, but do you want to just really quickly touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the analogy I use a lot of times is to think of the website as like the nucleus, right? It's the center point. Everything's coming off of that. So the website is either going to send someone to the online store or the pet portal or the online form, or one of those other tools is sending them back to the website to find what you need, right? The biggest thing you can do is just make those connections as easy for your pet parents as possible. So make sure your social media page, that field for website, make sure it's filled in. Same thing on your Google My Business. Same thing, on your online forms, if those are printed out, and there's references on the website, or if you want people to fill out an online form instead of on paper, make sure your team knows where it is. You can tell people. It's just making sure that connection between all of them is clear and easy to follow. That is something I don't know if y'all at Vertical Vet have recordings of the efficiency and the branding webinars, but we kind of talk about that in both of those. So I would encourage you to go check those out if you didn't sit in on them, because we kind of talk about how all those things affect each other.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good call. So you guys can find some of our existing marketing videos by reaching out to a member resource advisor with Vertical Vet. We have our YouTube channel, and of course through Elevate. It's so interesting, online marketing, Cassandra. I mean, I say when I got started, the biggest part about marketing was kind of, branded leashes and making sure that,
pens.
I remember, when we were able to get our name on toothbrushes, and that was, kind of the extent of marketing, where your marketing budget was, $2,500 for the year. And now what we're finding is with the advent of technology and how people connect, which is now really connecting online, that marketing is going from things that you can physically hold in your hand, but being able to take that thing that you can physically hold in your hand and adapting it to an online presence where they're seeing and having the same reaction to it, right?
Absolutely. I think the one thing I would say to that is what we've seen in the last, gosh, I hate to say almost 2 years, but I guess, yeah, a year and a half or so since the dreaded March 2020, is vet practices have, honestly, you guys have moved forward like in, a few months, you moved forward 5 years when it comes to technology. Embrace that. I know some people are still thinking, oh my gosh, I don't, want to, I hope this doesn't stick around, right? But remember that other industries are there. They've been there for a while. Your pet parents want these kinds of things. They want these online interactions, like you said, Megan. And honestly, the more you embrace it, you can get into things like we talk about in the efficiency discussion, where it'll actually make your life easier in the long run. So don't be scared of it.
Absolutely. And Beth just had a great kind of comment question that came through, and it was, what % of your budget should go towards marketing? And Beth, this is a very heavy question because we have to look at marketing a little bit different now, because your pet health reminders that you might send out in the mail, that's absolutely marketing. Your email, your text messaging reminders, that's absolutely marketing. When a client comes into your practice to learn a little bit about you, being able to give a clinic tour and pulling a staff member aside to do that kind of falls into that bucket, along with your website and your social media. And exactly, you just read it, internal versus external marketing. So you really need to look at where you might be lacking right now and say, okay, this year, this is what I'm going to pull out of my budget to be able to put towards it. Maybe this year I'm going to focus on my online presence, and I'm going to take out, part of my revenue to be able to enhance my online presence through social and through my website. Maybe that's your goal for 1 year. And then the second goal, you're looking into how you can connect with your pet parents via, the US Postal Service, which is, we can have a whole webinar on that in and of itself. But that's going to be another area that you can use. So great question. I wish I could be like, yes, 10% of your budget, should go, or towards your revenue should go to your budget, or to your marketing budget. What I'll do is I'm going to get some numbers for you, Beth, because that's a really great question. I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper, and I think Cassandra and I will call some contacts on us, because we get that question a lot, and it's different for every practice. Cassandra, do you have any thoughts on that?
I 100% what you said, agree. The only thing I would add, which I think is kind of what you and I would default to doing anyways, is if you have a financial consultant or a lender or anything like that that's involved in your practice already, they are absolutely the resource to help you figure out that number. So we can get you some kind of averages. We can get you average numbers for a practice that's, in a competitive, dense area versus a more rural area and so on. But really, that person who's really involved in helping you kind of game plan the business is going to help you figure out a number that works really well for your practice.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I said earlier, it's so much more than just those branded leashes, but the branded leashes are important too.
Yes,
so we want to put them in the budget. Are there any other questions before we finish up tonight? Any last thoughts?
I had one. I just kind of wanted to, Cassandra, you mentioned a little bit about the Google Analytics and the visual analytics. And that's something that I'd always heard about, but never knew until recently how to access. Can you tell the viewers about how they go about getting that information? Because I think once they have that, that can really help generate those effective SEOs.
Absolutely. So kind of as I mentioned, Google Analytics is like the gold standard, right? So every provider I know of who is managing the website for you will have Google Analytics at least. And a lot of times they can share access to it with you. So it's kind of, if you've ever shared like a Google Drive document, honestly, it's kind of similar where they're going to add your email, you're going to get an invitation to view your analytics, and then you can view it anytime. Other platforms, if you're managing your website yourself, usually have a way for you to add it in. That's a little more technical, but if you're good at doing Google searches, you'll be able to find some good how-tos for that. What I will say with analytics is it's technical, right? It's built for someone like me who's doing this all day to understand. So hopefully you have a provider who can help you kind of translate what you're looking at. And then with visual analytics, kind of the same thing. So there's different tools out there. I will say, being totally transparent, I don't know very many providers in the vet specific space that are offering a heat mapping type of tool, like what we're using. It's hugely valuable. You could ask if they don't have one for their entire client base that they're offering. They may at least offer you the ability to integrate your own. So you could do some searches online for website heat mapping tools and get your provider to add it to the website. But the nice thing about visual analytics, the reason we use it, the reason I recommend it so much, is it is a visual, way easier to understand version of Google Analytics. So you shouldn't have to like take off your vet practice manager or your veterinarian hat and put on your marketer's hat, right? Because that's not your job. Visual analytics helps you just kind of stay in this. It's very straightforward. It's easy to follow because it's visual. So it's taking all the same data that a Google Analytics has and putting it in a way where you're looking at your website and seeing an overlay on top of it of how people are using it. So definitely ask about it for whoever you're with.
Great question. And those of you that don't know, the voice that you hear in the background is Casey Harrell. She does a lot of the pieces that you see for vertical vet marketing. And so the consistent blue that you see in the background with the blue on our website, with the blue that you may be getting in a detailer or your member packet every year, all of that is just a really good example of some of the things that Cassandra mentioned today, was that consistency across all different avenues that you're still associating those images, those colors, those feelings with the same company. And that's what we want your clients to feel about your practice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you for the great questions. I love when there's good questions like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Huge shout out to BI for making this possible, and huge shout out and thank you to Cassandra Parsons with Busy Sites. Just absolutely love having you here, and you're just a huge wealth of knowledge for the Vertical Vet team and all of our members. So really thank you, Cassandra, for being here tonight. And you guys, we're going to be here in just a few more weeks where we'll have part 2 of this series. But don't worry, you don't need to remember that right now. We will, of course, send out some social media and websites so that you can really easily go ahead and click and register for the next webinar. So thank you, everyone, for coming tonight, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Bye, guys.